Welcome to Crackit. Today we are going to discuss about the custom annotations in Spring framework. How can we create custom annotations? How useful is the custom annotations in our daily coding life? And we discussed few other interview questions related to the implementation of the custom annotations. We have launched this channel new, so we request you to like, share, comment and subscribe our channel if you like the content. What are the interview questions that are covered in the video? What is custom annotation? How to create it? Is it possible to create the custom annotations? What are the uses in it? And few real-time questions. We'll discuss about this slide later in the video. So, how can we create a custom annotation? As we know, annotations should start with the @ sign. So, similarly, the custom annotation that we are going to create will also have this at signature. So, annotations are created by using this at with the keyword interface and followed by the annotation name. This is the name that we are giving to the annotation that we are going to create. It can be anything, maybe enable API loggers, enable method logging, or whatever the name we want. This is the name of the annotation, and at this at symbol and this interface keyword is the syntax that we need, that we are using to use this annotation. So public at interface, the annotation name. This is the syntax for creating the custom annotation. Apart from this syntax, we need few other information to create our custom annotation. So what are those? So we need few other metadata to implement our custom annotation. What are those metadata? Those are at target, at retention and at documented. So let's see what these three annotations are. So what is this at target annotation? So this annotation defines where to apply the annotation. For example, whether it is a method level annotation, or it is a field level annotation, or it is a class level annotation, or a constructor level annotation. So that type of metadata, that type of information about the annotation will be presented in the at target. This at target annotation takes the element type enum as its argument. So what are the possible values for those element type? It may be type, which means that the annotation is applied to class, interface or the enumeration. Field, which says that the annotation is a field level annotation. So if it is a method, then it will be a method level annotation. So the possible values of this element type enum are type, field, method, constructor, local variable, annotation type, package type parameter and a parameter. So these are the values for this element type enum, and this at target annotation takes this element type enum as its argument. For example, I am going to create a field level annotation. How can I create that? So I need to provide this at target element type dot field on top of my custom annotation. So now my custom annotation will look like public at interface REST API logger. On top of it, I will provide at target element type dot field. Why am I giving field? Because I am going to create a field level annotation. So let's now see what is at retention and what is the use of this in creating the custom annotations. This at retention annotation determines how long the annotations are to be retained, and the possible values for this at retention annotation is source, class and runtime. If we provide our at retention annotation with the source retention policy, then that will be retained only in our source code. For example, we have at override and at functional interface annotation in Java, and that is of type retention type source. What will happen if we provide source? That will be retained only with the source code and will be discarded during the compile time. So our example at override annotation will be present only with the source code, and that will be discarded during the compile time. During the compile time, we will not have this annotation at all. So next is the retention policy class. What is that? The retention policy class will be retained until the code compilation, and that will be discarded during the runtime. In runtime, the retention policy class will not be available, whereas the retention policy runtime will be available to the JVM only during the runtime. So if we didn't provide any of this retention policy to our custom annotation, what will happen? What is the default retention type that it will consider? The default retention policy is class. So if we didn't provide any of the retention policies to our custom annotation, then the default is class, which is the annotation will be retained until the code compilation, and that will be discarded during the runtime. What is this at documented annotation? So this at documented annotation, if we provide it on the custom annotation that we are creating, what will happen? So this at documented annotation will enable the tools like Javadoc to process it and include the annotation type information in the generated document. So if we are creating a document using the tool like Javadoc, will the annotation that I am creating needs to be included or not? That will get decided using the set documented annotation. If we provide it, it will include that in the document that is going to create, and if we didn't provide it, it will not include the document. This at documented annotation is mainly for the documentation purpose. Let's now see the custom annotation that we have created. So for creating the custom annotation, we need to provide at interface and the annotation name. So my annotation name is enable method logging. So I want to apply this annotation on a method level. So I have provided at target element type dot method, and I want to retain this annotation during my runtime. So this annotation will be available to the JVM during the runtime. So I have provided my retention policy as runtime. I don't want Javadoc to document this annotation, so I didn't provide any at documented here. So this is an example for creating the custom annotation. Just open this at request body annotation to explain one more feature of the custom annotations. So this is the annotation that has been provided by the Spring framework. If we see here, the name of the annotation is request body. They have provided it using this at interface, and the annotation is a parameter level annotation. So the element type, the target is element type dot parameter, and we want this annotation at the runtime, and that's why the retention policy is retention policy dot runtime. And Javadoc needs to include this annotation during the documentation, so they have provided it with at documented. So let's see what this boolean required default true is. So if suppose I want to provide any of the parameters to annotation, then I need to provide it like how we define a method. So here the required is a parameter that I need to provide to this request body annotation. So they have provided this required like a method with open brace and close brace. So what is the type, the value that this required parameter accepts? It will accept a boolean. So if we want to define any default value to this parameter, then we need to provide it like default true. Suppose I have a controller wherein I have a request body. So I want to, how can I use that required here? So required, if you see here, required equal to true and false. So for true, default is coming up. Why it is coming up? We just saw that in annotation the default value is true. So if I need to provide false, then I can give it like required equal to false. So if we need to provide any of the parameters to our annotation, then we need to create it like this in our custom annotation as well. So now I'm going to create my custom annotation through code, and I'm going to call that annotation as at enable method logging. So what I'm going to do with this annotation? So this annotation, when it is annotated on top of the method, it will log the signature of the method and the execution time. So do I need to write this code only for the method? No, I'm going to add this code as a common logic. Sorry. And If any of the methods needed, that method can just use this annotation. So how can that be implemented? So there is some feature called Spring AOP, which is to add few behaviors to the code such as logging, security, or the transaction management. Without inserting that logic into the business code, we can add it in a separate place, and that can be reusable. How can that be achieved? That is achieved through Spring AOP. So I'm not deep diving into Spring AOP concept in this video. I'll just give a gist of what Spring AOP is, just to understand the annotation that we are going to create. The aspect oriented programming features that Spring Framework provides is a huge and really an interesting feature. So I'll cover all the features about the AOP in my as a separate video in my future videos. So let's now try to understand just these 4 points about AOP to understand the annotation that we are going to create. First of all, what is advice? Advice is nothing but the action that we need to perform before and after the method execution. So I'm going to write an annotation called at enable method logging, and I want to do something, for example logging before and after the method execution. That logging is the advice, for example. So what is the aspect? Aspect is a module that is, for in our case, that will be the K class that has all the information that encapsulates this advice, point cuts, and provides cross cutting. If I have a advice in my aspect class, I need to apply that aspect somewhere. Then only my code will pick it up, and that point is called as a join point. So a join point is a point in the application where we apply an AOP aspect. So I have written a code which will, for example, I have written my custom annotation which will trace the signature of the method and the execution time. But somewhere in my code, I need to provide for which method it needs to pick up, or where exactly in the application it needs to pick up, and that is called as the join point. What is a point cut? Point cut is nothing but a group of join points, meaning selecting more than one or more join points where I want to execute this advice. We can define the point cuts using expressions or patterns. So to create our custom annotation, this information about Spring AOP is enough. So we have lots about Spring AOP. We will cover all those in our future videos. So let's now go and write the code for our custom annotation. So this is the new project that I have created using the Spring Initializer. If we see our POM, we have added the Spring AOP. For all the other dependencies, we have already used in our previous videos. So only this AOP I have added extra. Why have I have added extra? To create our custom annotation that needs to run before and after the method execution. So I need to apply that advice or an aspect. So I have that is an aspect oriented programming feature of Spring Framework. So I have added this dependency. So if you see here, this is my custom annotation. So my custom annotation's name is enable method logging, and the syntax that it follows is, as we already discussed, at followed by the interface. So at followed by the interface is the syntax, and enable method logging is my annotation name. So where do I need to execute this annotation? This annotation is valid on top of a method. That's why I have provided the target type as method, and this annotation enable method logging that should be presented to the JVM during the runtime, meaning the retention policy is runtime. So we have created our new annotation called enable method logging that will be applicable to the methods, and the retention policy of that annotation is runtime. So I have created my annotation now. So what will my annotation do? So my annotation is to print the method signature and the execution time of the method. So how can I achieve it? I can achieve it using my Spring AOP feature along with the custom annotation that I have created. My custom annotation needs to print the signature and the execution time that the method takes. So I am using the Spring AOP feature to achieve that. So I have written a class called enabling app method logging, application method logging. So I have annotated with it with at aspect and at component. At aspect, I want to let Spring know that this is an aspect class, and also I have provided it with at component. Why? Because this is my bean class. So let's come to the code here. What is this at around now? At around is nothing but my point cut argument. We already discussed what point cut is. What is our point cut saying? So our point cut just says that apply this advice to any method that is annotated with at enable method logging. Suppose, say for example, my controller method save cracket is annotated with at enable method logging. So what do I need to do? It's very simple. Execute this advice. My advice is to print the method signature and the execution time. So we need to calculate the execution time. How are we calculating the execution time? So join point dot proceed will call the method. Suppose in our example it will call the save cracket because that is annotated with at enable method logging. So before calling the method we are getting the system time. After the method execution we are getting the system time, and if we subtract these two we will get the execution time of the method. So in our real world scenario, suppose we need to identify which exact method is causing the performance issue. If we need to know in the which exact REST API call or which exact method is taking that much time, and we need to performance tune only that method, how can we achieve that? How can we know which exact method causes that performance issue? So our application is already in production and we got that issue all of a sudden, and we need to know which exact method is causing that issue. We can identify that using the Spring AOP feature. So it is very easy. In our lower environments we can add this dependency to our pom.example XML AOP dependency, and if we add this for example at an enable method logging annotation like we created, if we create one and if we execute this annotation using this aspect of Spring AOP to all the methods, then we will get to know the execution time of all the methods, and by analyzing that execution time of the methods we will get to know which exact method is causing that performance issue, and we can fine tune that method alone. So in real world this feature is really helpful. Why? Because why? Because to analyze the real-time production data, to analyze the data, this AOP helps a lot. With this we have finished writing our code to our annotation to our aspect. So I'll go to my controller. I've just post mapping wherein I'm trying to save the cracket object, and I have annotated that save cracket with at enable method logging. So let's now see what happens by executing this program. So I'm executing this program now. So the application is started. I'll go to my postman and I'll try to run it. So we can see that that object got saved, and in the console we can see that the method signature got printed. What is it? That is nothing but the save cracket with cracket as its request body. And how much time the method took to execute? The method took 53 milliseconds for its execution. So we didn't add this piece of code here in our method. The business logic is separate, but we have added this separately somewhere else through the use of AOP. If you see here this get mapping, I have not annotated with at enable method logging. Let's now see what happens to this. So for this get, I'll send this 1/1 send. So I'm able to fetch that object, but here if you see we didn't get anything here. Why? Because we didn't annotate this method with at enable method logging. That is our custom annotation. So only if we provide this custom annotation it will print what we have provided in our aspect. If we didn't annotate it with, it will not print it. So imagine that in your interview, your interviewer is asking this question. So they have a specific string called request received in their monitoring applications, and the monitoring application they are using is Splunk. So already Splunk is configured, and in the Splunk it always searches for this request received word. But you are creating one application and they need to pin your application to their Splunk. So you need to add that specific string called request received in all your methods. How will you do that? You came to know about this very late when you are moving your application to production. By the time you came to know, how will you do it? Will you go and add it to each and every method that you have created? Will you go and add it to all the newly created methods? If you do it like that, it is a time consuming process and it may be error prone. Why it may be error prone? Maybe your application may have like 100 methods and 50 different developers have developed that application, and there is a chance that there may be a spelling mistake, there may be a word left, there may be a letter left. So all these may happen. So how will you achieve that in your application? Yes, that is through the custom annotations and the Spring AOP concept. So we have already created our custom annotation. Let's make a little changes to our AOP class so that we can achieve this functionality. Let's try to do the coding now. So this is the example that we have created already. So here we have sysouts, but in our production application we will not add sysouts. Instead we will have loggers. So for logs I'll add a slf4j, and before calling the method I need to know like which exact URI it is calling. For example, I need to log which exact URI it is calling. So I need that HTTP servlet request. So I will auto wire it. If we don't want to print that information, there is no need for us to auto wire this. I'm just going to print it out for like better understanding. So I thought I'll add it here. So as we already discussed, this join point dot proceed will call the method. So before calling the method I need to log something. So before calling the method, what I'll do is request received, maybe request received for which method that I need to, like for which request. So I'll print the get request URI maybe. So it will print the request URI of the method that I am going to call. And here what I'll do is, after the method call as well, request completed, I would say request completed, and I'll print that information. So now in my Splunk, what and all I have like this request received string and this request completed string. So my Splunk will pick it up. I'll try to run this program again. Since my application is up, I'll call my post request. Yes, I have called the method. Let's go see what is there. So in our logger, if we see, we can see that request received and request completed with the request URI that is passing. So if we need to provide some other information here, we can provide that as well. So but for the get, it will not print anything. Why? Because I didn't annotate it with my custom annotation. So for any Splunk or any of the other monitoring applications, if they provide us a specific string, or if it is already configured and we need to configure in our application, we can do it in a single place in our application. So using a custom annotation, we can annotate it, and using AOP, we can create an aspect to use that annotation. That's the simple answer, and that's easy as well. Thanks for watching Crack It. Please support us with your likes, shares and subscriptions. Stay tuned for updates.